Today's topic is public procurement and its role in boosting, empowering innovation specifically for local ecosystems. And I have a person who knows a lot about this topic for his current role and his prior experience. And this person is Rikesh Shah, that is currently serving as head of innovation, procurement, and power center at Connected Place Catapult, but is also very well known for being the person leading the innovation department at Transport for London, TfL. Hello, Rikesh.
Hello, good afternoon, Alberto. Great to see you.
It's a pleasure. So let's go straight to the topic. I think that is currently, again, this is part probably of all your entire professional career. Again, you have been leading Transport for London, the innovation activities. I think Transport for London has done a lot and has been one of the role models in innovation for public organization, especially innovation through startups. And then again, you have your current role is close to the topic of public procurement, and again, your expertise is also recognized since you are a lecturer at the Royal College of Arts and also at the School of Engineering at Harvard. So again, I think there is a lot that you can tell us about the role of public procurement on innovation. So I will go straight to the point and help our audience understand why public procurement might change the situation, specifically for startups, but also for public organizations.
Yeah, and I think firstly, thank you, Alberto, for having me. And I think the first thing is procurement sometimes is can be seen as a boring term and a very bureaucratic term. But let me just give you some context. The public sector in the UK spends £400 billion a year on procurement. And if we think about it, how much is being spent across Europe or across the world, it would be trillions of euros that's being spent by the government on procurement. And what we do know with the public sector is it has more challenges than ever before. You know, if you think about the last few years around the cost of living crisis, around COVID, finances for agencies across the public sector are tight. Also, in parallel, we have challenges like the climate emergency. We have childcare services, social care, health, security, and so much more that the public sector needs to provide services for. So what we need to do is we need to think about, how does the public sector spend money? How do we spend money in the public sector? And there are some challenges. You know, some of the challenges are far too often when a procurement goes out, only one company bids. I saw a statistic recently in the UK that 21% of tenders have a single bidder. Or sometimes the market is saying it's really hard to engage with the public sector when it comes to innovation. It's seen as too difficult, too complex, but given the size of the prize, there's a massive opportunity. And I think we have to challenge that notion, which is the public sector has to do everything itself. I've seen too many CTOs, chief engineering officers, who feel like they need to invent the solution. But I think what they need to do is, rather than trying to do everything themselves, or rather prescribing when they go out to the market, is to be much more open with the market, with the problems that it has. And that's an opportunity for us because the technology is advancing at such a fast rate. Some of your listeners could be innovators. That how do we bring some of that innovation in? Because the barriers to entries have come right down. And we have diverse suppliers, whether it's startups, whether it's scale-ups, whether it's corporate open innovation departments, whether it's academic spin-outs. How do we start curating that market as the public sector? Because fundamentally, we need to deliver better outcomes, cheaper outcomes, quicker outcomes. So it's not about being first, it's not about being an inventor. And that's something I hear too much from CTOs. But I think it's because if you try and do everything from scratch, it always costs more money and the risk increases. Whereas why don't you de-risk it by bringing innovation from the outside where it's already been proven and let the market come up with some of the ideas? So you asked me about the role of public procurement and innovation. The public sector, because of the budgets that it has, is an incredible shaper of markets. It can shape the innovation ecosystem. But we've got to do that by defining the right problems with the right context. There is no point going out with really high-level challenges, which the market responds to, and you can't deal with those responses. So contextualize the challenges that you're facing. I think the other thing is scout the market. You have a brilliant platform through Mind the Bridge. Scout far, scout wide, because you just don't know where that innovator could be. And look for diversity through your supply chain. Don't always work with the same old people. They might be good, but test it, validate it. Also, create some test beds to de-risk. Far too often in the public sector, we worry about culture, we worry about risk, we worry about failure. But create this test bed. And through that test bed, you might be able to experiment and see what's working and what's not working and put the right guardrails around it. You have to get the procurement processes right from the beginning. As a result, you can do the scouting, the R&D, and the scaling. And remember, I'll go back to your innovators. There are billions of pounds that are being spent by the public sector, and they're desperate to add more value. You can be part of that ecosystem. And the final point is the public sector cannot fall for the hype. Whether it's AI, whether it's robotics, whether it's machine learning, whether it's computer vision, quantum, or new materials, data, and so forth. They've got to be the intelligent client. So really understand that if the market is coming up with new ideas that are innovative, do you really understand what they mean? And also, have you lined up your organization so that buyer, which isn't always one buyer, it could be multiple buyers, is ready to buy? So in many aspects, it's no different to buying as a private buyer. But what we need to make sure is the public sector is much more entrepreneurial, thinking about values and managing the culture and managing those risks. And you know what? It can add significant value to the taxpayer and the broader public sector to achieve better outcomes.
No, definitely no doubt about that. But I was listening to you were saying, I think, is so obvious. I'm thinking about the typical people that are working in public organization. And the problem is that most of the time, picking up on an innovative solution from a non-traditional accredited supplier following on a very, very strict process that cannot be applied when you are looking for something novel, exposed to a certain level of risk.
Yeah.
And I think the big problem is how to push these people to take some risk in organizations that are designed for the good, for be totally risk averse. So this is the main barrier. I think why I should do something that is not written in the protocol that keep me safe. Why I have no upside in making a better choice for my organization and for my country, for my city, or for whatever
and I wish that's a brilliant point. And I think this is where it needs bold leadership. It needs leadership from the politicians and it needs leadership from the administrators. Because far too often we stick with the status quo because we worry about the media, we worry about stakeholders, we worry about other key stakeholders. And I think by giving people the license to say, you know what, I want you to try 20 things. And I know 18 of them won't work. but those two that will work will bring back millions of dollars worth of value or millions of euros worth of value or pounds. And I want you to think more entrepreneurially, because if we're desperate and we're stuck and we need to do things better, cheaper, quicker, we've got to create the right conditions and the right environment and also the air cover to be able to get things wrong. And I think that's critical from a cultural point of view.
Going to more concrete and actually your current experience, you're currently running a UK program on public procurement innovation. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, so I've got a fantastic job. So I'm the head of the Innovation Procurement Empowerment Centre, and it's a really fortunate job that I'm involved with. I have a brilliant advisory board and a brilliant team. And it's fundamentally about how can we get more value by bringing innovation in, or through bringing innovation in, by the use of procurement. This isn't just a UK issue. I talk to colleagues across Europe, the US and Asia, and they quite often say to me, there are some brilliant innovators out there, but I just don't know how to bring them in and scale them to create more value for my region. So for me, it's about working with local authorities. It's about working with regional bodies, but also national bodies and public agencies to use procurement as an enabler to create new value. The Connected Places Catapult is an accelerator for the UK. We're not for profit, so our driver is absolutely neutral, and it's about creating best value. So how can we help the public sector curate the market and bring some of those innovators in and deliver better outcomes? The focus of IPEC is very much around empowerment. So that is about empowering the practitioners, the service owners, the politicians to say, how can you be upskilled and become a much more entrepreneurial and deliver more with less? And that is about, most public sector agencies probably spend 60 to 70% of their budgets on procurement. So how can we drive more value from that? So we're focusing on several things. The first area is around creating new tools and creating an upskilling program. So we're currently working with local agencies who want to bring new innovation in areas of air quality, in areas of freight and the adverse impact of freight, but also retrofitting of housing and also around net zero. But what we're doing is we're not simply running the program for them. We're embedding some of my subject matter experts in my team into their team. And as a result, the challenge is how can we create the right conditions right from the beginning to ultimately get the benefits realization at the end? We've all seen it. A mayor turns up, cuts the ribbon for an accelerator, and then you ask the question 12 months later, what happened? And sometimes nothing's happened. So what we're trying to do is how do you get that grittiness, that detail, and you get into the weeds of creating every possible chance of delivering success. So that's one. The other areas, we've formed a consortium called IPEC Research, and then we're working with the University of Birmingham and the University of Manchester, but we're open to bringing other academic institutes. And that is around how do we provide thought leadership and build the evidence around the role of innovation through procurement? How can we demonstrate where the barriers are through evidence, but also where it's working well, how do we make the case for change? The third area is we can't do everything ourselves. We've got to build communities. So we're working with local authorities, we're working with big sellers, small sellers, and also other key stakeholders. So if any of your audience wants to register, please go on to Innovation Procurement Empowerment Centre on LinkedIn and join the community and talk to us about some of your challenges, but also great case studies. The other three areas are ones around advocacy. So trying to work with politicians to make sure the regulation enables more flexibility in the procurement so you can bring new innovation in. The fifth area is around impact. So we're constantly researching public sector agencies to see what's working well, what's not working well, and how IPEC can help. And then the final area is partnerships. How can we work with similar organizations across Europe and internationally, but also within the UK to make sure we create that coalition of the willing to drive the change. So lots more to come next year. And ultimately, I would like IPEC to be the catalyst through the Procurement Act, which is changing in the UK later this year, on how it looks at things like pre-market engagement and market scouting, multi-stage procurement, so you can do R&D and scaling through one procurement, co-creation between public and private agencies, particularly the bigger corporates. Also more transparency around spend, both at pre-procurement level, but also more important at post-procurement level at the contract award. How much is being spent on innovation? I want to diversify the supply chain, but also can we allocate more funds for innovation through procurement? Can public agencies allocate dedicated funds? And then finally, how can the public sector join up so it can create those economies of scale and create even more value for the UK and other public sector agencies across the world? So lots going on, really exciting, and we'd love to work with some of your audiences to really realize the benefits.
And by the way, the scope is obviously is UK, but you're going also beyond UK because again, starting this year, the Innovation Procurement Empowerment Center will support a special award as part of Startup Ecosystem Stars Global Awards for recognizing the most interesting best practice in public procurement across the globe. It's also a way of sharing the experience that you guys have been doing in the UK with other regions, and at the same time also to identify some potential best practice from outside UK to be potentially be imported and adopted. So I think this is a very valuable partnership that again we're really looking for gathering some more value out of that.
Absolutely, and I'm glad you mentioned that because we have to normalize this being entrepreneurial in the public sector to create better value from the private sector and bringing innovation in should be a way of working. And as a result, if there are good case studies out there, let's recognize it and reward it. And we're absolutely delighted to be associated with the award ceremony. And we look forward to people submitting some great ideas.
Yes. Going to, I think, the big topic or the elephant in the room is collaboration between startups and public organizations. And then again, I think you have a lot of experience, and I go back, especially to your experience at Transport for London. And again, can you bring a couple of examples of how collaboration between startups and public organizations produce significant value and significant impact? Because most of the time it's difficult to identify some real success stories. Can you show a couple of examples just to showcase how much value can be extracted from these kind of partnerships?
Sure. So, London's transport system carries about 31 million people every day. Whether it's the metro, whether it's the buses, the trains, the Docklands Light Railway, cycling, and many other modes of transport. So it's a big, responsible entity. And if I think about some of the examples, the first one that springs to mind is us engaging through data. And when we released our data openly to the market, we saw the likes of Citymapper, Google Maps, Apple Maps, Mapway, Bus Times, and many others creating new products on the back of our data. So one takeaway to your audience is you don't always have to exchange financially. You can always exchange through other assets like data. And what we saw is by releasing our data, we had 17,000 entities registered to access our data. In London, very quickly, we saw 700 apps powered by TfL data. That's 700 businesses that have been created through open data. And we ran an independent study. And that study indicated that for every £1 we invested, we got 130 back to London. So the value of open data from an innovation point of view was incredible. But then other examples were, if we thought we could innovate through data, why can't that also be an innovation using procurement to also bring in innovation? So we started to think about open innovation, market innovation. And 2 or 3 examples that spring to mind. One was a program called Road Lab. So that was to reduce the adverse impact of roadworks in London, which was costing London billions of pounds. So we went out with a very simple problem statement, and we reduced the procurement documentation from 60, 70 pages to about 5 pages. And the idea there was to make sure from a bidding point of view, it was a level playing field. So it enabled a startup to compete with a large corporate, because large corporates have large bidding teams, and not startups don't always have that. So we opened the competition. We asked a very simple question. We reduced the insurance levels, and we reduced the last year's turnover questions and all these difficult ones that act as barriers for some of the smaller companies. And we received hundreds of applicants. We then down selected to 30 through a pitch day. And then from the pitch day, we selected 9 companies for a 10-week program where we provided some seed funding, access to subject matter expertise, but most importantly, access to a live test bed. We looked at a wide range of ideas. So from a procurement point of view, generally you look at like for like. Here we were looking at ideas from modeling to 3D to machine learning through physical barriers. So there were 9 very different ideas. But at the end of it, we created a business case for 2 of the ideas. And then we awarded a contract at the end for 2 of the suppliers who are now working directly with TfL. So that's an example. We applied the innovative partnership procedure, which allows you to do R&D and scaling at the same time, and you can iterate along the way. So that was that second example. And then the third one is you don't always have to engage on cash. Again, going back to the data example, we worked with one company where we put out a challenge to say we want to encourage people to walk more in London. So we worked with a company called Go Jauntly, and what they do is they crowdsource walking routes. And we ran a competition so anyone could enter. And then at the end of the competition, we selected them. We gave them some seed funding. But what they wanted was some PR and some partnerships. So we started to raise awareness of Go Jauntly because it was a great product to encourage more active behaviours in London, active travel. And what we saw at the end of it is at the beginning, they had about 5,000 users. Towards the end, when I was there, they had about 450,000 active users. So that's a great example of a product scaling just with a bit of PR support from a large corporate to achieve social outcomes. So there are multiple examples that I've seen this. And also I've seen it not just with TfL, but I was just reading last week in Oslo, there's a new platform that's created, a communities platform by the public agencies, where they're grouping together to encourage more innovators to come in and respond. Or I've seen applications in Dorset in the UK, where they're thinking about the role of 5G and how can 5G help solve some of those challenges that they face in Dorset, which is great to see. I've seen examples in San Francisco where they're using different routes to bring innovators in. So I'm certainly starting to see examples now where startups are starting to come through the procurement lifecycle and they're starting to add value. And I think we need to talk more about this. We need to normalize it. And that's what I'm hoping that through the award ceremony, but also through dialogues like this, we get more case studies coming through.
Another important player are large corporations. And again, also innovative projects can come out from the collaboration between cities, public organization, and large corporation. Do you have any example you might probably refer to just to showcase that?
Yeah, and I think corporates have significant R&D budgets. And far too often I'd get large corporates approaching me, and it happens to many other public agencies, where you open the briefcase. And once you open the briefcase, you start showing all the products that you have in your R&D lifecycle. But far too often, the buyer would say, these are all great ideas, but none of them solve the problems I have right now. So something I wanted to flip at Transport for London, and something I'm an advocate of, is why don't the public sector engage with the private entity at the pre-procurement stage to say, I want to explore some R&D with you to see what can and can't be done to solve my problems. So suddenly the innovator, the corporate, is coming in at a much earlier stage. And by having that collaboration, that co-creation approach, what you can do is define a requirement downstream. So to give you 2 examples, in London, I was approached by Mercedes-Benz, and they were talking to me about connected autonomous vehicles and lots of things that they could do for London. I said, can we just leave the autonomous bit away just for the time being, but can we talk about the connected vehicle? And an average car has about 100 sensors now, an average new car. And then sat down with them, we said, look, people are tragically dying on London's road network. And we can't just respond to where people have been killed or seriously injured in terms of our interventions. We need a better risk model. So by sitting down with Mercedes, we started to understand where there might be near misses, where there might be sudden swerving, sudden acceleration, sudden skidding. All of those are risk indicators of a potential incident taking place. And then what we started to see are patterns of potential near misses in London that we didn't know about. But then we slowly just re-engineered our road, or we did some marketing, and we saw some value. And we did something similar with Bosch too, which is around what's the role of computer vision and how can we use the latest versions of new sensors to create value. And what we found is by working with them, we created a new model which reduced exposure to bad air by 20%. And we changed that. We use that same model for 1,200 traffic signal changes across London. So as we found that worked, and we also worked with Google and others, but as we found that worked, Transport for London created a new procurement framework. It's called the Innovation Collaboration Framework. And the idea there was, how can we work with the market, particularly the corporates, on co-developing the R&D solution? And if that's successful, the buyer, in this case, Transport for London, can use procurement to directly award a contract and procure items. And then also, if it's successful in London, the procurement was designed where London could potentially co-commercialize it as a partner sells it to other cities. So that's an example of working with the private sector on co-creation, co-development, and adding value. And I think these are things that can be done, but it just needs the right foresight, the right creativity, and the right engagement with the market to really add value.
That is, I think there is a lot of us. So if I need to summarize everything that we said since the first minute of this very, very interesting conversation, and then from our millions of conversations we have in the past 5 to 10 years, because again, we have the pleasure to know each other since a while. I think there is a massive potential of innovation that public organization can extract out of the private sector and probably outside of the usual suspects. And there is a gigantic need today to do so, because as mentioned, there are challenging external conditions, there is high budget, there is the need to do more with less resources. The problem most of the time is in the process, because the process is not used to do that. So now if we are able to change the process, we can really trigger at least a large chunk of this massive potential. So I think that should be probably the main message. And I think we rely on the work of people like you and the expertise of people like you that you have done in the past. You are currently working to make it even broader and broader, to make this big transformation happen, because we badly need it.
Completely agree.
Okay, Rakesh, so thank you so much for this conversation, and let's keep up with the good work. Definitely touch base regularly to see how the work is evolving, and again, looking forward also to the next Startup Ecosystem Star Awards to identify some interesting use cases maybe can be replicated by others, because sometimes if the problem is the process, maybe we just need to copycat processes that are working somewhere else and adopt it.
Completely. Alberto, thank you for having me.